What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. We are back for part 2 of the divisional previews. We started with the Atlantic Division. We are now moving into the Metropolitan Division. This one's an interesting one in that it's probably the least or second least most volatile, I guess, if you want to call it that, divisions in the league. I think the bottom is pretty cemented here. The middle has a little bit of question marks, but I think by and large we kind of have a pretty clear expectation of who's going to be 1, 2, probably who's going to be 7, 8. And then again, there's always a little bit of a mushy middle in every division. But nonetheless, let's jump right into it. My number 8 seed, to the surprise probably of very few, is the Pittsburgh Penguins. I did think about having another team at 8. We'll talk about them when I talk about them here at 7. But there's just far too many questions about this Pittsburgh Penguins team to put them higher than 8. I know they still have Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, Erik Karlsson, but those guys all well past their primes at this point. Obviously, Sidney Crosby still a very capable player, no questioning that, but the rest of those guys, no longer the producers or impact guys that they were, at least a handful of seasons ago. So looking through this forward group, outside of this first line, there's just really not a lot there. Looking past it, Malkin is going to give you what he gives you. He's probably good for 60, 65 points at this point. Anthony Mantha has not been a second line player for a long time at this point in his career. And then looking down to the bottom 6, there's just too many question marks like all over this lineup. I think if these guys all play to their ceiling, this is actually a pretty decent bottom 6 forward group, but a pretty decent bottom 6 forward group is not going to carry you to the playoffs, even if Sidney Crosby scores 120 points. So that's that. The group of defensemen is pretty equally abysmal. Karlsson and Letang are still going to give you a bit of production. They're really not that great on the defensive side of the puck anymore, and you're surrounding them, with all due respect to these guys, with Ryan Shea, Connor Clifton, Owen Pickering, and Matt Dumba. I don't expect this to go well for the Penguins really at all. And then you wrap that all up and you have Tristan Jarry as your starting goalie. At least going into the season, Artur Silovs did get picked up in an off-season trade, so who knows? We could get a week, 2 weeks in, and he's the starter. And if he can continue the momentum he carried off of just winning the Calder Cup in the American Hockey League, maybe they have something there. Obviously, there were some Canucks fans that weren't super happy to be giving him up, but that's like maybe the biggest upside potential swing this team has is if Silovs comes in, gets the starting job, and is good. This team could be a little more competitive, but I really would be surprised to see it come from like their forward group unless Rucker McGroarty absolutely takes off, and I don't necessarily expect to see that happen. So Penguins at 8, I think I'm probably going to be in the majority of other folks ranking this division when saying that. At number 7, again, I did mention I had thought about putting this team at 8, and that's the Flyers. But I actually think their team is like quite a bit deeper than the Pittsburgh Penguins at this point. Their top 6, again, talking about floors and ceilings of where certain players and certain groups could be. The ceiling of this group, I think, is actually pretty high. I think the one caveat to that is Christian Dvorak. We kind of know what he is at this point. Sean Couturier, to a similar extent, he could find the fountain of youth again and, bring his production back up. I don't think we should be expecting that by any means, but just looking up and down this lineup, it's actually not horrible. I think their bottom 6 is a good group of role-playing players that are going to do kind of what they need to do to make sure that they don't get just caved in every game. And if this top 6 can produce a decent amount, I actually don't think Philly's going to be as troubled in the goal scoring department as they've been in years past. The defense group, it's kind of just is what it is at this point too. York, Sanheim, Drysdale, when healthy, are actually an okay top 3. And then Nick Seeler, Yegor Zamula. It's probably going to be Rasmus Ristolainen here more than it's going to be Noah Juleson. So again, that's kind of like a middle-of-the-road group of defensemen. It's not going to get caved in every night, but they're certainly going to struggle against some teams as well. These two guys specifically are still relatively young, so there's still some room to grow for them. I don't want to say that we kind of know what they are completely, but Drysdale, we know the injury history there. Cam York, there's not a ton to say. I guess the one thing that you can say for Cam is that he's no longer getting coached by Torts, so maybe that's a good thing for him. Gives him a bit more freedom to kind of do his thing. Whether or not that's going to end up being the case and making a significant difference, we'll see. And then the Flyers, one of the most just like baffling moves of the offseason, they go out and try to address their goalie problem with Dan Vladar, who's probably not even better than Sam Ersson. So I would expect them to still struggle to keep the puck out of their net. Ersson had moments last year where he was good, plenty of moments last year where he wasn't good, and Dan Vladar, really the same story on a fairly similar Calgary team. Obviously, Calgary finished much higher in the standings than Philadelphia did, but the story is pretty similar for both of these guys. So not really high expectations for the Flyers. I do think it'll be an exciting season for them. A second season for Michkov, again, under a guy not named John Tortorella. You bring in a guy like Zegras as well. Definitely some buzz around this team, but I don't know that the expectations are all that high. At number 6, and I struggled a little bit with this too. Again, we're kind of getting into like the mushy middle of this Metro division. And I really went back and forth on who to put at the 6th spot, but I did settle on the New York Islanders. They just, I don't think, have enough to get themselves to a playoff spot. Again, barring Sorokin having just an unbelievable season, in which he would probably have to win the Vezina to get them to the playoffs. I don't see this happening. Their group of defensemen without Noah Dobson looks quite different. I mean, your number one right side defenseman being Tony DeAngelo at this point in Tony DeAngelo's career, probably not the best. This pair is going to do what this pair does. It's a really, really good shutdown pair. And then we'll see what Matthew Schaefer looks like. Obviously, it's going to be his rookie year in the NHL, assuming he plays the full season. We'll see how he adjusts. I could absolutely see him climbing and getting top pair minutes. Whether or not I want to pair him with a guy like Tony DeAngelo, I'll let you guys make that decision for yourselves. But yeah, this group certainly looks much different without Noah Dobson, and I think they will absolutely feel his absence, although he had a, quote, down year by his standards last year. I think that is a gaping hole in this defense group that eventually will probably get filled by Matthew Schaefer, but for now, I just don't think it's quite what it was. And obviously, their scoring has just, it's never really been their prowess since the 80s. The main key pieces are still here, right? Horvat, Barzell, Anders Lee. You're obviously missing Brock Nelson in the Colorado trade from last season, but I think they're in this kind of similar to like what Washington did a couple seasons ago, this retool where you're not going to be at the absolute bottom like Chicago and San Jose, but you're probably not going to be in the playoffs either. You may be missed by, 5 to 12 points, something like that. So they'll still be an okay team. I just don't think, again, barring Sorokin having an unbelievable Vezina level season, I just don't think this team's going to have what it takes to get into the playoffs. At number 5, similar kind of internal debate with myself here. You guys will probably notice me like hesitating a lot through this video because I'm thinking on the fly, do I want to make changes to this? I do have Columbus at 5. I actually really like this team. I, watched a couple of different, podcasts and like rankings episodes over the course of the off season that a lot of folks had these guys as high as like 3, I think. And in my initial reaction, I was like, there's no way Columbus is going to finish at 3, right? But the more I look at the lineup and the more I kind of think about what they have, this team absolutely has the ability to do some damage this season. And they're kind of similar to the likes of like in Anaheim, I almost want to say, right? Like they have this key piece down the middle in Fantilli, obviously, for the Ducks. It's Leo Carlson. And then they've surrounded them with a mix of guys, internally that have grown in the system with them, and then also brought in guys that just create a good kind of insulation for those players, right? So Boone Jenner obviously been there for a long time. Sean Monahan. Ken Johnson's not necessarily super young at this point, but he's actually over the last year and a half shown some pretty good strides of improvement. And then guys like Coyle, Lundestrom, Miles Wood, what is left of him at this point in his career. This is actually a decent forward group. I do think they're going to be kind of inconsistent if I'm being 100% honest. Like, these guys are not, I don't think any of them are surefire 30 goal scorers. Like, the closest to that at this point probably is Adam Fantilli. Folks are obviously going to come at me for saying it's not Kirill Marchenko. Obviously, Marchenko, I think, is still a very good player, but they just don't have that like one piece that's really going to carry the offense. I think they're going to have to do it kind of by committee, and I think they know that and are okay with that. Their defense group is kind of where I have issues, or at least the beginning of issues, right? Zach Werenski, of course, very, very good Norris level season last year. Dante Fabro was a surprising bright spot for this team, and then the bottom four is where I get a little bit concerned. Dent Matejchuk, Ivan Provorov, Damon Severson, and Eric Goodbranson. I said the same thing about those two specifically at the beginning of last season, and they were not awful. So made me eat my words a little bit there. But I just, again, it's not a group, no matter how much I know about what they did last year, that I can look at and say, oh, like this is going to be good. So a little bit worried there. And then, of course, we get to the goaltenders. And this is really the biggest issue for Columbus at this point. Wow, and they actually list Jet Greaves as the starter going in. So I don't know that I expect that to be the case. I'm sure Elvis going into the season will be the guy for them. I wouldn't be surprised to see Jet Greaves take that over if what we saw from him at the end of last year is not a flash in the pan. That's, of course, part of why they moved off of Daniil Tarasov. But I just don't know really that either of these two guys have what it takes to really propel this team toward the playoffs. Again, if I'm wrong for either of them, this team absolutely could be there, but I think the forward group for them is pretty good. I think the back half is what's going to be problematic for them. So we'll see what happens. I also don't really love this power play. I would expect this to shift. Like Fantilli should be on the first line. Frankly, you could probably throw Dmitry Voronkov as a great net front guy. But just regardless of what group you put on this first unit, nothing's really going to make me look at it and say like, oh, that's a top 10, top 15 power play unit. I just don't think it's going to happen. And obviously special teams are very important in the NHL, especially during the regular season, really, and the playoffs. But yeah, Columbus very much going to be a fun team to watch this year, which is great. They haven't really been able to say that for a long time. So good for them from that standpoint, but I just don't know that they're quite there yet to the point that I expect them to be in the playoffs. Number 4, and this one might surprise some people, specifically people that know me and know who I cheer for, or if you've watched the channel for a little bit now, you know I cheer for these guys, but I have Washington at 4. I almost put Washington at 5 below Columbus. My reasoning for that, and the reason I have them behind the team that we're going to talk about momentarily, while last season was fantastic, and they showed like really, really good, again, positive strides, especially for their younger guys, towards like finishing, quote, this retool. There were so many career highs on this team last year. It was ridiculous. I mean, Pierre-Luc Dubois was not a career high in points, but was close to it, and was the best season that we've seen him have in a handful of years now. Alexei Protas, career year. Dylan Strome, career year. Connor McMichael, career year. And then you also lose a handful of guys, Lars Eller and German Giappone, who weren't major contributors to your team, but were also not just like fill-ins, right? So that line is probably going to be completely overhauled here. They have Beauvillier, Lapierre, and Leonard. I actually would expect that to probably be the pairing. There's not anyone missing that's injured here, right? Sonny Milano, who's been out for a while, and frankly, I don't know that he cracks this lineup, even if he was healthy. These two guys are going to have to step in and step up in big ways to make sure that there's not a big gap in what last year looked like versus what this year looked like. I would expect Ovechkin to have a bit of a step back now that he's passed the goal record, and I think there was a lot of air in the sails because of the goal chase last year that's just not going to be there this year. On defense, I actually really, really like their group of defensemen. Again, no one name. Chychrun had a great year last year, but no one name at this point that really sticks out. Carlson is well past being that guy at this point in his career. But just as a unit, there's no one guy that we're throwing out for Washington that makes me kind of like wins, right? Like I'm pretty comfortable with all 3 pairs for this team. So that's a really strong spot. It's probably the best part of this team. If last season was an anomaly, which I think probably it was for Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren. Not that I don't think Logan Thompson can be a good goalie, but I don't think that he is actually at the level that we saw for the first 60% of last season. I mean, he really is the reason the Caps made the playoffs again, especially that first half of the year where he was just unbeatable and stole like a good handful of games for them. I don't expect that to get replicated. I hope I'm wrong. And Charlie Lindgren, who's been good for the Caps for a couple years now, I do think that contract was an overpay. I think it was kind of one of those things where like we made one guy happy, we have to make the other guy happy too. Not that I'm not happy to see Lindgren return, but I just don't expect really those two to have the same season they had last year. I hope I'm wrong, and that they're comfortably in the playoffs, but I think they're going to be fighting for a playoff spot just given the things I've mentioned here, all of the career highs from last season, the goal chase no longer being kind of at the forefront, and the lack of depth that's now having to get filled in by younger guys that have not necessarily been familiar with playing those roles. So Washington at 4 for me. Hurts my heart a little bit to say it, but we'll see whether or not that ends up being a hot/bad take or not. Number 3, predictably, I guess, now that you know Washington's 4, is the Rangers at 3. There's a lot of people that I think are really disrespecting this Rangers team. First, you bring in Mike Sullivan, who, frankly, I just think is a much better coach than Peter Laviolette. There is obviously a bit of turnover if you look long term from last season, right? No more Jacob Trouba, no more Chris Kreider. So there's holes to fill there from that perspective, and of course Keandre Miller as well, which we'll talk about in a bit. But still some really good top-end talent on this team. Panarin, Trocheck, Miller, Zibanejad. When they're on their game, I mean, that's still a very dangerous top 6. And then looking at their bottom 6, this is still a good group. Not a entirely dissimilar conversation from Washington in that you have some guys that are in the early parts of their career that are forced to play these, third line, fourth line checking roles. So we'll see specifically how a guy like Gabe Perreault does. He obviously had a little bit of experience at the end of last season, but how does he fare? He's not the biggest guy by any means in a role like this with two guys like Parson and Brodzinski who are definitely not afraid to go play that kind of game. And then on defense, obviously, a lot of turnover here. You have Gavrikov and Fox, one of probably the better pairs in the NHL. Adam Fox has not been at that Norris level that we've seen him at previously, but obviously still very, very capable. I would expect to see him probably named to Team USA for the Olympics. That'll be another video that I go through probably once the season gets started, but that pair is going to be really good. Carson Soucy, Will Borgen. This is a pretty solid shutdown pair, in my opinion. Two of the more, when they're on their game, underrated guys in the league. I think they really don't get talked a lot about at all in the media that I hear, at least. And then Urho Vakanainen and Braden Schneider. A little bit ironic, I guess, that not that you moved Keandre Miller just so Schneider could move up, but like that was a good bit of it. And now he's still going to be behind Will Borgen on this third pair. So it's a good group of defensemen. Don't get me wrong. I actually think this is one of the better groups in the Metro. But it's certainly going to look different than it did at the beginning, obviously, of last season and maybe even 2 years ago when Jacob Trouba was not like this black hole hated player for the Rangers. And then in net, we obviously have Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick. And I'm actually going to pull up the stats for these guys really quick just so that we can get the numbers here. So 27, 29, and 5, a 286, and a 904 for Shesterkin. I would expect both of these numbers to improve, and obviously I think if that happens, he's going to be probably above 30 wins. But the amount of disrespect I've seen specifically on Shesterkin has been pretty remarkable. I mean, this is a guy that prior to last season was pretty much the runner-up for the last, 2 seasons, 3 seasons to Connor Hellebuck for the best goalie in the league. And the Rangers as a whole have one bad year. And suddenly, whether it's just goalie rankings in general or like fantasy conversation, not that he's like outside the top 10 or anything like that, but like it's still Igor Shesterkin. And unless I'm proven wrong this year, I would expect him to continue to be Igor Shesterkin. So while I don't want to necessarily have a lot of confidence in this team, I actually have a fair bit of confidence that this team is going to bounce back and they probably should make the playoffs again. We'll see if I'm way off base on that, but yeah, I think this Rangers team is probably going to be a lot better than people are giving it credit for. The other thing that people are missing is there's not a lot of instances in NHL history where a team has gone from winning the President's Trophy to being outside the playoffs and not gone back to somewhere in the middle there and probably making the playoffs again very often at all. And the Rangers, obviously, 2 seasons ago, President's Trophy winners, last season outside the playoffs. I'll let you guys come to your own determination on what's going to happen with the Rangers there. But I do have them at number 3. At number 2, I have the New Jersey Devils. This is a very interesting team. Largely the same top 6 that they had last season. A little bit of turnover here in the bottom 6. They bring in Gritsyuk. I actually don't even know who this is. Connor Brown and Evgeny Dadonov. And the group of defensemen is pretty much the same as well. Um, there's some kind of like heart and soul guys that they lost. Obviously, this bottom half, Paula, Lazar, they did not retain Brian Dumoulin. Obviously, they have too much going on offense, and it's still Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen. Um, this I really don't have a lot to say about this team. They kind of are what they are. I think if Jack Hughes was healthy at the end of last season, it would be a different conversation. Again, and I've not the first and surely not the last to say this. If your team lives and dies on the hill that is Jack Hughes being healthy, that's probably not the best thing for your team. And we saw how different they looked against Carolina in that first round playoff series without him. But he's obviously a top 10 probably player in the league. You expect a player like that to be a significant game changer when healthy. So if he is healthy, this is a very solid line. If they bump me Meyer especially up to it, this is probably a top 5 line in the NHL when the 3 of those guys are together. This middle 6 is going to look a little bit different. I don't want to say that it's going to be worse for having no Eric Holla and no Curtis Lazar in the time that those guys spent on that line, but it'll be different. They were never huge difference makers for the Devils, so we'll see what happens there. On defense, it's kind of a similar conversation. Obviously, they need to sign Luke Hughes. But when these guys are healthy, this is a really good group of defensemen. I think this is more appropriate having Siegenthaler on the third pair. I don't love Brendan Dillon being on the first pair if that's actually what they roll out, but this is still a good group of defensemen. And then, of course, Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen, neither of them in their prime by any means at this point. We kind of know what they are. Markstrom has had these inconsistency issues over the last couple of years, and I think statistically Allen was actually the better of the 2 goalies last season, but there's no question who the starter in New Jersey is by any means, and these guys are kind of going to give you what you expect to get. It's going to be probably around 10th rated goaltending in the league, just because you can't march Jacob Markstrom out for 60 to 64 games anymore. He's not that guy, and he's proven that with his health issues. But Jake Allen, obviously a very capable backup when he's on his game. So Jersey kind of is what it is at this point. I kind of want to see them make another move, but you look at this roster and it's like, almost like how much more do they need? I think it's a pretty good forward group, pretty good defense group, pretty good goaltending, but maybe just not the best, like not elite level on any of those 3 roles. Again, when everyone up front is healthy, I think they certainly can be that, and their power play shows it at times, but we'll just see what happens with New Jersey. It's going to be a matter of can Jack Hughes' shoulder do what his shoulder is supposed to do. So we'll see. And then at number 1, probably to no one's surprise, is the Carolina Hurricanes. I don't want to just talk about their offseason because I think what this team did over the course of last season as a whole was really interesting. They obviously tried bringing in Mikko Rantanen, identified that wasn't really working, and I think made a very good move to Dallas. I know people are talking about that whole Rantanen situation as like you can look at it as a failure because they didn't maintain the best player in that trade. But I think if you look at this team now, the forward group is not, again, this elite level forward group, but there's not holes in this team up front. They have a pretty good group of centers with Aho, Jarvis, Stahl, and Kotkaniemi, assuming they run that. Again, it's not the best in the league, but 1 to 4, like if Kotkaniemi is your 4th line center and he's playing decently, that's pretty solid. Jordan Stahl at this point in his career, we know what he is. And then as you look down the wing pairs, right, like Ehlers and Svechnikov is going to be pretty good. That line, who has never really had that third guy to make it like one of the top lines in the league. Ehlers can be that guy. He's not always that guy, but he certainly can be. And I think Aho and Svechnikov, when both healthy, have not really had that luxury for a while. And then you look down the lineup, obviously Logan Stankoven is not Mikko Rantanen, but long term he probably will grow to be, again, not Mikko Rantanen, but a very good, maybe 25 goal scorer, maybe a 30 goal scorer. And you can probably say the same for Jackson Blake. Obviously, they didn't pick him up via trade last season, but I'm fairly comfortable with the way they handled the whole Rantanen situation, despite the fact that they're missing out on what could have been just a freakish, monstrous line here if it was Rantanen instead of Nikolai Ehlers. No hate to Nikolai Ehlers, but that's just kind of obvious. On defense, I really like the moves they made here too. They get rid of Burns and Orlov, and while on paper that might look like a downgrade just because of the name value that those two guys have, you bring in Keandre Miller and you are going to maintain a full season of Alexander Nikishin. I do think this will make their defense better. I think there's going to be some toying that they have to do with figuring out who goes with who. I think that's probably going to take a bit of time. And I think as Nikishin grows, that obviously is going to change that dynamic. But this is going to be a very, very good defense group. And from 1 to 6, it's probably one of the top 5 in the league, I think. Jalen Chatfield has shown some surprising growth. Sean Walker had a down year last year, but playing with less exposure to top end players like he was in Colorado. Shane Gostisbehere, not necessarily there for his defensive prowess at this point, but a power play specialist and a pretty good one. So as a group, these guys all kind of have their specific roles. And while on some teams that might not work the best, in Carolina, it seems like it'll work and has worked pretty well. And then in net, we have the same duo that we've had for, I think, 3 seasons at this point in Kochetkov and Anderson. And again, we kind of know what these two are at this point. Kochetkov still has some room to grow, but he's not shown necessarily the strides we would have wanted him to if you're a Carolina fan. And Freddie Anderson, if he can stay healthy, is probably a top 10 goalie in the league still. But there's always that question with Anderson of, can he stay healthy? How many games is he going to play? How many games should he play so that when Carolina gets to the playoffs, he's available and ready to go? And we saw some shades of what Freddie Anderson can do in the playoffs. And there were some games against New Jersey where he wasn't necessarily the busier goalie, but certainly had moments where he needed to make big stops. In a lot of those instances, he was able to do that and be sharp when the Canes needed him. So very interesting to see what happens with Carolina this year. I do expect them to be the top team in this division by a pretty safe margin, but I could be wrong there depending on a number of things. So that's it for the Metro. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Leave a like if you like the video. Subscribe as well. It's free, and I will talk to you when we cover the Central.